Welcome everyone. We still have some people joining, or welcome everyone and thank you to today's broadcast. The title of today's broadcast is Periodic Access Review Frequency and Types. Our presenter today is Preston Leftwich. My name is Stephanie Anderson. I'm the Global Webinar Manager here at Pathlock. I have a few housekeeping items to go over. So Preston, if you'll go to the next slide. If you have any audio issues during this webinar, click on Preferences and then Audio. From there, you can check to see if you are using the appropriate audio device. You can also click on the play sound to check if you can hear the sound coming through your speakers. This presentation will take approximately 45 minutes. There will be a Q&A session following the presentation. So if you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A chat box for our speakers to answer at the end of the event. To prevent any background noise, everyone is on mute. And with that, I'll turn the time over to Preston to introduce himself.
Thank you very, very much, as always. Nice to see everybody today. Thanks for joining me on a Wednesday, so right in the middle of the week. Hopefully everybody's getting ready for the end of the week, as they say. Weather's cooling down. So my name, if you haven't met with me before or haven't attended a webinar, is Preston Leftwich. I am a technical manager here at Pathlock. I specifically focus on some of the Oracle product lines with Fusion or Oracle Cloud, EBS, and JD Edwards, and our solutions that go within that particular timeline. Today, we're going to talk about a periodic access review, which I know is everybody's favorite thing to talk about. And we're going to kind of walk through what the purpose of periodic access reviews are and the kinds of reviews that you can do, and then sort of how often you should be doing them. The goal is to sort of set what we consider the best practice and how things are designed in the system and what they work for and what you get out of them if you do them on that particular time frame as we talk about them. As far as what is a periodic access review, the periodic access review is actually an entire process that confirms in your system that you've checked a couple of different things and that those have been done on a regular basis, and that that's periodic in the sense that it's not always a year or 2 years or 3 years, that there's some sort of consistency and actual design that's an intentional thing there that you can actually check with people and say, hey, we've got a plan in place. We check every 6 months, we check every year for the different kinds of things. And we're going to talk about why you'll do those and what those kinds of timings should be. The types of periodic access reviews that are sort of normal amongst people who have application controls in place for their systems are one for roles and two for users. And that is independently having someone be responsible for what is a role title and saying that that role then is properly labeled using whatever naming conventions that you have, and that it is properly identified in the business unit that it's responsible to, and then that the applications, reports, and other activities that you're giving access to that role are appropriate for the type of role that you're granting. So if you name a role with digits and words that mean certain things within the company, then what you need to do is make sure that all of those follow that same path and that same pattern, so that then when you say, I'm in a finance role, you've got that FN word letter combination in there, that you use numbers to indicate maybe level of access, a 1 at the end or a 9, or those kinds of things are what we're talking about when we talk about roles and role naming conventions. And then we're talking about, in this process, identifying applications and reports that fall into that role's responsibility, and someone taking responsibility for saying that that's the correct thing that that role should have. The other side of that, in a separate process, is that the users that are assigned to roles have been approved and reviewed by whoever is in that particular responsibility for that person. A lot of times people will make it a business unit responsibility. Anybody that comes in the business unit, that's a responsibility, or a department, or possibly it's by shift. If you've got some workers that work, employees that work in a group where the shift matters. A lot of clients that I work with have multiple users across multiple branch plants, business, even companies. And those approvers and reviewers have to happen across all of those departments, not just because one person's responsible for one person, but because with shared services amongst companies, with shared activities amongst companies, you get a lot of people who can access a company here, one in France, one in Latin America. The next thing you know, I've got access to 5 or 6 different global companies, and that line of who's responsible for me blurs. And so the idea being that you're looking at both roles and users, and then it's periodic. That's the key to what we're talking about. That it's you're doing it on a repetitive basis. It's not that you do it when someone audits you. You don't run up and all of a sudden try to cobble together spreadsheets to get things done at that time. What you're attempting to do is to get that done on a consistent basis with intention. There's a process you can document, and then you can show that you've done your due diligence, so that really what you've done and how you've done it is not in question, if you will. Regarding how frequent we should be doing that, it really depends, right? So the people who have access to your system have different varying activities that they can do. People who work possibly in the receiving dock that only process receipts and returns might not have the same level of access as someone maybe in the finance department who's in control of an entire set of accounting journal entries and bank statements and reconciliation processes. And so defining that group of people, carving those people, that business role into parts and looking at them, that's part of the exercise of coming up with what do you want to look at and how often you want to look at it. So in an example we like to talk about, someone with sensitive access should probably be looked at on a monthly basis. Now everybody says, oh, wait a minute, I don't want to do that. That's too much. True, it does seem like it's an overbearing piece to have to manage that level of detail. But part of what we're going to talk about today is how we can make that simpler and it doesn't become overbearing. And then on the other side, quarterly and semi-annually gets to the less inclusive access, the less intrusive access that you would then have a group of people around that need to come back together and say, yes, they have access to run warehousing. Yes, they have access to do damages and returns, but we've approved that and we've approved their system. So periodic review for sort of the business units, maybe quarterly or semi-annual, maybe even annually if you think that meets the needs of auditors, internal or external. Sensitive account reviews, maybe looking at that access as things change. Monthly is a high volume, but if you have a large company and a lot of access, you certainly want to make sure that as people change nowadays and the turnover sort of has hit us in depth, that is something that we look at. So we know now that more than 10 people have access to something. Now it's 15 or 20. Those things are what you're doing as well. You're not just looking at what people have, you're looking at the number of people who've been granted that role since the last time you looked at it. And then generic accounts, right? Something that's more repetitive. People have access to maybe integration programs and managing EDI processes and so forth. Maybe that could be a monthly thing. And then the other side of that equation, right, is those are the actual application or users that have actual access to roles. And the question then becomes, do you need a security workbench review? And to my end, that's the one where if you've got a stable environment and people don't change the roles and the accesses to those roles very frequently, this one can actually you can get away with this on a semi-annual basis, right? Because you can say, I've built that finance one role up, and unless someone rolls out a new security model or a new company or a new business unit, I really don't have, that's pretty stagnant. It's going to stay the same unless something changes. The one thing that goes along with this conversation then is to be able to say there are triggering events that cause you to look at a particular group of reviews more early, possibly, than you would normally do that. For example, if you buy a company or acquire a company in a different country or in a different part of the United States or any other part of the world, and what you want to say is, okay, once I've migrated that group in, once I've done my exercises, mapped their responsibilities, brought all of the people in, had them start using our system, then what you need to say is, okay, now let's look at whether or not they've been given the appropriate review. Let's have someone with oversight who understands the traditional roles of our company, look at what that role was designed to handle that particular business unit or company or country, and look at the number of people now that have increased their abilities to access finance, accounts payable, receivables, that kind of thing. So from that perspective, that's kind of what we're talking about. And part of understanding and mapping out that process then is to make sure that before you get started, you have a couple of things to check and a couple of things to review to make sure that your review process is smoother and more accurate, right? So for example, fixing any user accounts that don't have an address book number assigned to them. Well, if you don't have an address book number assigned to a user profile, yes, we almost all type in B Smith for our Bob Smith user, but that doesn't necessarily identify that record in other parts of the system where that address book gets updated, not the user ID. And so it's important to have that sort of consistency where that address book record gets created. That is something that you should probably take a look at just as an advice piece, because it's very clear when other people manage your user profiles that they skip that address book creation piece, because the address book gets locked down, somebody jumps over top of it, gets a user on the system, and there's no address book record. And now there's a disconnect. It's an inaccurate representation transactionally, what's going on in the system. You lose some of that integrity, and you should be able to tie that up before you start one of these sort of access request reviews. Any disabled user accounts, you would want to remove them from the actual periodic review, select them out, data select those out with by search type. Identify and reject active users with that X search type. That's kind of what we all have come to know as the X employee flag. That way, the search types out of the system from an address book perspective, and your disabled user, right, the ones with the O2 status code on them, those aren't considered either. And then also with any user account with 98OWSEC set up, those are users that you're not going to have access to security so much, as they might be integration roles and so forth, and you might not want to cloud your periodic review with that. And then all the inquiry roles that you already know are inquire only and that you're not necessarily worried about transactional approval, that's an open-ended one, right? You could actually say, people looking at your financials is potentially a risk. You want to know who those people are and you want to make sure it's approved. In that case, you would leave this one in here. You'd actually just go ahead and show everybody and make sure you have your roles. But part of understanding that is knowing your role count. Is your role count going to be 265 roles? Or do you have 265 roles because you've been doing this for 10 years and you really only want to look at 65 roles? So those kinds of decisions help you, one, trim down the volume of data that you're going to look at, and two, expedite the accuracy because you know you've eliminated anything that would be considered sort of a false flag in your system. And so going back through that piece, here's sort of what we help people guide with is a frequency so that you have an auditable, done a documentation process on how to handle these kind of things. And by that, what I mean is, here's a frequency matrix where we're looking for monthly profiles, where the monthly profile of, for example, sysadmins, right? They'll run that every month, except for the months where it gets picked up and everything else. So if you're running a sysadmin user and every month you run it in February and March, May, June, August, and September by itself. And then what you are able to do from that perspective is you get it picked up by the all user profile when you run those over the quarter. Now, if this is a semi-annual thing, say we do January, July, then these would be 5 in a row that you would get picked up here to run and pick up that sysadmin. Again, sysadmin access is a very powerful tool. It's very, very strong as far as what it usually can do in the system. One of the things I talk with clients about all the time is taking those admin records and paring them down so there's no transactional analysis. It's access to everything, but we're taking away the ability to create journal entries, and because that troubleshooting doesn't need to be in production, right? We can troubleshoot in PY, we can get right. So this may not even need to be that. If you've taken that advice on your admin users and you don't have that sort of star all access, you can actually pare this back and do this once a quarter, just like the rest of them. It kind of depends on where you've gotten. And then the same thing sort of with the security workbench on the all roles here. The workbench meaning that someone who has all the roles gets reviewed on the quarter. and then the Workbench roles get picked up and run the rest of them, so you get that sort of coverage in the system as far as making sure that you have a documented process in play, so that when someone audits and says, hey, how often have you checked your role access, you can say, I check it once a quarter, or I check it every month, depending on how that works. So for example, a JD user profile review, right, to a process for sysadmins going into production, right? They log into JPD, right? They review and assign address numbers, this taking sort of those checkpoints that we just talked about, this workflow. You actually can check for those missing records in the system. The IT application side of it, right? Send a list of role owners that have to be updated. Those particular security group records can get updated. Then we can export those role owners. We'll go ahead and kick off the periodic review, make sure that all the data integrity is there, and then we'll work through the actual design itself and move forward in auditing and managing the data. And so part of what I wanted to show as far as kind of how the system goes is our tool set within the actual JD Edwards platform. The design of the periodic review is designed to do exactly what that flowchart says. And I believe Stephanie can jump in and say that we'll give you this slide deck if you're interested in it, so you can have these flow charts as far as understanding how the process works going forward if you'd like. But for our side, we broke them into two different groups, right? We've broken them into that security workbench and that user profile piece, and we treat them very similar to how you would maybe a cycle count, right? You can create the record, that's a snapshot right then and there as of today at 12:36 p.m. It will snapshot whatever the records are, and then you can actually work with that review. And that process is sort of a dashboard where you get to review all of the things that have changed. So we'll talk about Security Workbench just briefly, then I'll go over and show you what a user profile looks like. But this is the place where we're talking about the things that have been added to roles. It's not about the users, it's the applications and reports. And one of the things we have in our process is establishing that baseline, that standard that says we reviewed it on the 1st of January, 2023, and everything has been approved at the end of, let's say, the first month that we did it. It took us a month to get it done. The goal with this product, and this is the one where we talk about return on investments, massive the first time you get it, 70% kind of a number. And that is, once you do this the first time and get that baseline, work through the triggers and learning the process, the next one becomes a net change. So when we run this in July, we can look at the things that have changed. We can see that roles have been added, changed, deleted. We can talk about who's moved, how those things have worked in the system. And if you do those things, once you look at the changes, when you review the record, it very clearly shows you from one status to the next that when you're looking at the security that goes along with this particular profile, here's the records that are out there, and here's the changes, right? We've got 3 color code schemes that very quickly identify. Here's that snapshot in my talking example, that's January. And in this example, let's call this July. And since then, someone said, you know what, we're not supposed to have delete access to address book. That's silly. We should inactivate bad records. We don't want the numbers being taken out of the system and messing with the integrity of our system. So let's make that change. So we make the change, and the next time this particular profile is up for review, this master record, we see that what's changed in this fuchsia purple color is that it's gone from a Y to a no. Had this record been deleted, this name and address change record been deleted, this line would be in red to indicate that it was no longer available in the current snapshot. And if there was a green record here on this line and didn't exist previously, this would indicate that it was added. So it's very clear to see, very efficient to see right off the bat what records have changed since the last time I did this. So yes, the learning pain, the walking through a new product pain is there for the beginning, but it's very small compared to everything that you're going to get going forward, because it grows on itself, it becomes iterative, it becomes easier and easier to use and to review, and the process itself of reviewing it can be filtered down for the user base based on what you're responsible for. So you can actually put down in your system all of the data that you're responsible for, and when that person logs in, they'll see only what they're responsible for. That really helps us from providing an efficiency perspective, because as you can see, as the administrator, I have all of the roles in the system to review and approve. In the case, so then the next idea behind that is that you can also then, someone who's managing this review can come in and say, show me everything that's been approved. show me everything that's been rejected, and show me everything that's been ignored. And we give everybody an option to ignore because sometimes they've actually previously engaged in this and nothing's changed, so they don't have to worry about going through the approval process. Possibly they're out on vacation or some sort of holiday, so we need to bring that back around a second time. We can report on all of these statuses, so we know who's done the work, who hasn't. We can run a smaller subset of data and get that person to come back and review this as necessary. And then the actual review itself, previous review, you can actually work with all of the previous reviews that have been closed. You can go back and do the same sort of inquiry. You can look at the details. You can look at just the changes, right? This will consolidate all the changes and only present them on screen so that you can go back through here and hit find and say all of these records have been added and changed in the system since I last came out. And then you can scroll across the data set and see what's changed in the system. Again, added, changed, deleted, so that it's very clear in your review of the data what's happened. You also can tell that it's been approved or skipped or simply never looked at to begin with. So that overview of what's happened in the past helps you perpetuate getting efficiencies down within your user groups, so the next time you do it, more people it perpetuates the learning, which then turns around and gives examples to people on how to do the work, and more people get in and do the work because it's quicker and simpler to do than having to sort through spreadsheets and trying to understand what the P4210 does versus the P4310, right? That helps out a lot. From a user profile, same idea, but now we're going to talk about the same concepts in the system. We're going to talk about the users that have been added to the system since the last time we ran this review. We're going to talk about the users that have been deleted, changed, currently anybody that's current that hasn't changed, and unchanged, right? So now you can come in and same idea. You can review a user profile and look specifically at what's changed for that user since the last time. At the baseline level, this would all be blank for the last status. This would all basically just say current status, last status. It would be the same. Nothing would have changed. But if you look at the actual data from one that has changed, same rules apply. Didn't have this record now. This has been taken out. It's in red, and this has been added. So this person used to have access to the supervisor for ERP support in a pre-production environment. Now they've moved over and become an AP clerk. That's very easy for you to see if you're the administrator of this person or the manager of this person, to say, that's right, Tony's now an AP clerk, has transferred departments, and to feel like you have a personal connection with what's going on with the data. Same idea before, if the records change, added, change, delete, that kind of things, you would get that purple view for anything that's changed in the system as well. So from a data perspective, Workbench is here. Again, status is to go through here and look at what's been approved, rejected, or ignored. And then the status approval itself is simply a matter of right-clicking and going into a approval mode, looking at all the other people who have not approved it, right? Making your comments and flagging it as an approved role from your perspective. Additional to that, you can reject the record, and with the rejection comes your ability to update and provide comments. We actually have automation that goes around this piece as well. If you reject what someone's assigned with, if it's in your SOP, if that's how you want to do it, you can actually disconnect those people from that role until someone comes back and maybe makes a manual update to them as well. And then the same thing, right? Working with the snapshot after it's been closed and put to bed, you can come back through and work with the data from that perspective, give you that ability to go back and say, I don't know what happened last time. I can't remember because it was 6 months ago. You can, all the data's here and auditable for you. And as with everything, you can export any of our grids to Excel so that you can review them later or pass them around internally to discuss them. So from a standpoint of a periodic review and how to handle this stuff, the concepts that we offer in our product line, if you will, the idea behind everything is that you're able to identify the types of periodic review that you want to deal with, right? The idea behind dealing with that periodic review is that you have one established. The periodic part, you've established a timeline, a month, quarter, semi-annual, yearly, and that you know the type. You're identifying both people assigned to a role and then what is assigned in the role. keeping those segregated helps meet GRC compliance rules as far as not doing it all at the same time and having identifiable people responsible for each of those. That's sort of why we have that suggestion in our wheelhouse, if you will. So from that perspective, that's kind of where my presentation goes. It's only taken about half an hour. I figured that would probably be the case, but I would like to open it up for an opportunity for questions. If anybody has any kind of thoughts about how they do this or how maybe this would get utilized going forward, I certainly would be happy to talk to you about it or provide any feedback if you have it. Otherwise, as always, I appreciate everyone attending. It's always nice to have one of these seminars. I enjoy doing them, so it's nice to have everybody here. I'll give you just a minute and see what's going on and check in with Steph and see if there's any kind of open items for her.
Thank you, Preston, and thank you all for attending. We just have a few announcements to go over. Again, if you have any questions, you can add them now into the question box and we can answer those as those come up. The first question is, will this recording be available afterwards for review? Yes. The recording will be sent out to all the people that attended and registered through email by tomorrow. So you should be getting that in your email tomorrow. If you don't somehow get it, feel free to contact us at events@pathlock.com and we can make sure you're getting that. The next question is, hi, we are planning to implement this module. How much of prep work is required and time to implement? Preston, do you want to take that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So preparation work kind of is those key points I went through. You'll get the slide deck too, right, Steph?
They just get the recording in their
recording.
email.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, my mistake. It's the recording now. Okay, so from the recording perspective, if you freeze the kind of tips and tricks, that's the kind of prep work we're talking about. The idea being that you take an inventory maybe of how many users you have in your system, so you kind of know what you're dealing with. There is a configuration piece that goes along with this. I will show you real quickly kind of some of the things we can configure. It shouldn't take you very long. Usually is a couple of days of setup from that perspective in my mind. Part of the product line, if you purchase the product, is the training and handoff of whatnot. So what we do is kind of working with roles and supervisors, and that's defining in the profile review whether you're going to use a supervisor or whether you're going to deal with role owners. So are you going to identify people by their user profile and assign someone to approve them, or are you going to deal with just the roles? So you're going to take a role and call it a role owner, and that role owner is going to do. So breaking that out takes time. Actual implementation hours doesn't take long. Business process conversations in meeting rooms to decide who's in charge of what, that could take you a week. But from a setup perspective, it's not anything more than deciding which one of the two subjects you want to do, supervisors or role owners, and then cutting and pasting within this particular, naming your group, and then coming back along and actually cutting and pasting. If you choose supervisor, for example, cutting and pasting all the user profiles that that person's responsible for. If it's a role ownership thing, cutting and pasting the roles that are responsible for that. Again, set up it the first time you do it. It takes a little longer, but part of our training is to teach you how this gets done and help you set this up so that you're able to kind of move forward, if you will, down the road. Make some decisions, right? What kind of reviews do you want to deal with? Do you actually want to expire rejected role relationships? That's what I was talking about earlier. You can turn that on or off depending on how you want to do it. Same thing with the security workbench. If you're looking at a role or a user profile, if you have user level security in place, which you shouldn't have at this point in your life, hopefully, but if you do, setting up that matrix of approvers and so forth, that's a process that you go through as well. And then the other side of that equation is some things like, what email do you want to have out there to notify the users, hey, you have a profile open, you need to go out there and manage that. You would obviously need to train your approvers on this process. So I would say if you want to talk realistically in timing, it would take you a couple to 3 weeks to get this up and configured and set up. but based on availability, it could take anywhere from a month, right? If you had to figure out where everybody was available, put everybody in a room, teach them how to do the approvals and so forth. And then there's a couple of reporting codes that you want to do possibly in there as well, and then test your functionalities for your email. So the setup itself, a couple of days spread out over the first week, making decisions about processing and so forth. Maybe then getting in, doing a sample, documenting process so you can train your approvers, and then holding a workshop to train. So I would say 3 weeks, probably from beginning to end. Okay, thanks, Beth. Next.
Yeah, the next question is, how do you generate a snapshot only for certain roles like sysadmin?
Good question. So when you define, there's a version of a UBE that runs behind here. And so what we'll do is when we go to create that particular snapshot, we'll actually allow you to set processing options on this particular piece. I've got the open review so that I can't actually demonstrate that. But when you create the review, the version of the UBE that runs, we would use category codes in that configuration to pick what roles we're picking up during, kind of like you do with a cycle count, right? You have a status 1 or you have cycle count ABC. You can do the same kind of thing with this as a flag, the kind of roles that get picked up. We're going to run an intermediary. Let's say we do the sysadmin where we do it monthly, right? That's an A. And then we have one that runs quarterly, that's a B. We run semi-annual, that's a C. So if you have it in that kind of mentality and you categorize roles as an A, B, or C, when you run the UBE, it only pick, if you have it, you're running the quarterly one, it'll pick up A and B's, not C's. If you're having semi-annual run, it'll pick up A, B, and C. And if you have the monthly one, it'll just pick up the A's. So it's just a category code configuration thing. Certainly, that's something we help you design as part of our handoff of the product as well.
Okay, I think that's all the questions we have for today. Do you want to go back to the announcement slide, Preston?
Sure, you got it. Let's go back here. There we go. That good?
Yes, perfect.
Thank you.
Okay, and thank you all for those questions. Okay, so we have a few announcements. Our next webinar coming up is Security Assessment, the Low-Cost Route to Efficiency and Compliancy in JD Edwards Enterprise One. That's a partner webinar with JDE Mart. That will be on Thursday, September 8th at 12 p.m. Central Daylight Time. And that will be hosted on the JDE Mart site. Then we have a webinar coming up this is our next customer webinar called Maintenance of Your Software Tables Neat and Tidy Setup. That will be on Wednesday, September 21st. If you want to mark your calendar, that will be the next customer webinar at 1 p.m. Central Daylight Time. And with that, we just wanted to say thank you. Will you go to the next slide, Preston? We just wanted to say thank you. And if you have any more questions, you can reach out to Mike Ward at mike.ward@pathlock.com, or if you have any questions about this event, you can go to events@pathlock.com. So with that, we just wanted to say thank you, and we hope to see you at the next webinar.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great week. Thank you so much for your time.